Thank you for listening to the Ramble On Podcast Network. The following podcast was produced by members of the Highland Rambler from Highland High School in Salt Lake City, Utah.
Hello, Highland Rams. Welcome to today's episode of Creating Community.
Today we're going to discuss those infamous pieces of cloth we have grown so accustomed to wearing over the past year, face masks.
We'll examine the effects they have on our communication and interpersonal connections during the COVID-19 pandemic, and how we here at Highland can create community in spite of it all.
My name is Emma Johnson.
And my name is Olivia Hufford.
And this is Creating Community.
So I think one of the most interesting things about this past year and the pandemic is seeing this evolution of masks as they've gone from don't wear, as said by even the CDC, to this must-have and a key part of our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. It really, at the beginning, it seems like an unimportant, just like a little piece of clothing, but it really has become so important.
Yeah, and I remember when I first started wearing them, it seemed very unnatural and almost a pain to wear. And I also think at the beginning I did have a hard time breathing with them and had other issues, but now it just has become almost like a security blanket for me and feels like a necessity. Every time I walk out the door, I always bring my mask.
I agree. Like, we've really all just gotten used to them. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I also was working in a grocery store a little bit. And I just remember it was really interesting to see the evolution of when people were really resistant to wearing them and it wasn't required or anything. And you had to ask a lot of people to put them on, to a state where just everybody is carrying around multiple masks all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And now I think as we're transitioning back into in-person school, it seems as if there might be a whole new social, psychological barrier that we're dealing with.
Yeah, as this is also recent, there isn't a lot of research about how this is going to affect us and kids, like psychologically and mentally. But now I definitely feel like communication has been changed or hindered, at least through because of a lot of interactions over Zoom and virtual things, and then also because of the masks.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that we discuss how these barriers have affected us as we work to recover from the social blow that we received as a society as a result of isolation and other aspects of the COVID-19 pandemic.
How do you think masks have hindered your ease of communication?
Well, what I think is interesting is that usually, as what scientists say is that a big part of our communication relies on our facial expressions, our eyes and our eyebrows, and especially, our face, our smile. And I think that it's interesting that we don't have that aspect of communication anymore when we're out in society and in groups. And I think that I'm not sure how that has affected communication, but I do think it did seem a little unnatural to talk to people at first, especially because we didn't have that. We couldn't rely on people's facial expressions like we usually do.
Yeah, I agree. It's gone from just talking to like 20 black screens on Zoom when everybody has their cameras turned off, to now we still can see people, but you are missing a lot of that like facial expression language.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think that at the beginning, especially for me, it was really hard to hear people when they would talk with the masks on. And I think we've had to kind of adapt to that and be able to learn how to enunciate and how to project with this, piece of cloth covering our mouth.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I definitely do think that people have evolved in that way and learned how to talk with this extra piece of thing covering our mouths. So how do you think that's affected your social relationships and connections?
I think it's hard to say. I think it's hard to blame kind of my social health, I guess, solely on the masks, because there was that long portion of time during 2020 when we were quarantined and we were isolating and we didn't have any social connection at all. And I think coming back from that, it was really difficult to figure out how to kind of still be able to thrive in social situations because we didn't have that practice. What has your experience been?
I think I agree with that, though, that the long period of isolation has affected like my ability to connect socially more so than the masks have, just because it definitely is something that you kind of get out of practice with, and you forget what it's like to be in a room with 15 other people and just have a conversation with everyone.
Yeah.
And that's definitely something that we used to have all the time, but now we're just starting to get back into it.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think that, again, we're just starting to figure out how this is going to affect people's mental health and post-pandemic and everything. So we're going to go down and talk to some Highland counselors
This
about...
is student counselor John Valentine.
All right, and I think just to start off, how would you say that masks have affected the way that students interact with each other?
You know, I've been really impressed with our Highland students with their masks, okay? I haven't, I'm kind of worried, high school kids, students might not want to wear their masks, and I haven't seen anybody that haven't worn their mask, and it has been an issue. And, I think, I haven't seen too big of issue with how they're getting along and how they're talking with their friends, and, I'm sure it kind of puts it's hard, it's not easy to talk through a mask, but really I think they've done really pretty well in communicating, and their socialization, I think, has all been pretty good, really, with their masks.
So you think this isn't really going to affect kids psychologically long term?
I think the pandemic has affected, it's been really hard for a lot of students. Online, some students really excelled online really, really well, and some it was a new experience for them, and they kind of struggled. And so I think it was fairly difficult with everybody, but I think maybe the education part of it might have suffered a little bit this year with the pandemic. But I think Highland's got a pretty good plan to get those students back on track. I don't think there'll be any issue with those students, catching back up and being on track for graduation, ready to go off to college. I don't think with wearing the mask, I don't think it'll be an issue with them, in the future. Hopefully we get rid of them, and they'll go back and remember those awful days that they had to wear a mask everywhere they went. But I don't think there'll be any long-term issues with them having to wear the mask.
That's good. Have you seen any difference in like the mental health of students?
Yeah, the isolation has been really tough, especially that time where nobody was in school. The isolation, students couldn't even go out with their friends on Friday night because they were kind of isolated. And I think, we've had more mental health issues this year than we've ever had, and I think it's totally because of the pandemic.
Absolutely, and I think that moving forward, it is incredibly important that we collectively continue to try and build these relationships and connections, and despite those barriers that we might be seeing, whether that be the physical masks or the aspects of the pandemic as a whole. And because I feel like what we've seen through our discussions